Greetings, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the weekly Mormon News Roundup. I'm your humble host, Steve Ace, and that's talent on loan from Kolob. Each week, my crew and I, we ruminate on the great and spacious beehive, so thanks so much for joining us to discuss the current events in Mormonism. We've got a big episode on our hands here. It's March 11th, and it's episode 110. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has made a historic and gigantic purchase of real estate and other items in its historic Kirtland area of Ohio and Nauvoo, and a bunch of other things. It's gone global. It's really important. The church has made a not-so-veiled message against Donald Trump. And the Ninth Circuit Court has granted a new hearing in the James Huntsman tithing refund case. You're not going to want to miss a minute of this episode. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm at www.mormonnewsroundup.org, or you can send me an email to kolob@mormonnewsroundup.org. I'd like to invite onto the program my fabulous co-host, Ryan. Ryan, how's it going?
Hi, glad to be here. It's an exciting week to be here. There's a lot of news this week.
Yes, this is going to be a tremendous week. Briefly, you were on episode 81, and that was a fantastic episode. But for those who missed it, Ryan, who are you and what are you all about?
I mostly have a TikTok channel where I create Mormon-related content, mostly geared towards ex-Mormons, kind of talking about news and making some funnies. I dive into a lot of Mormon history. For example, I've been recently doing quite a long series about Joseph and Hiram's deaths and some details you may or may not know about that. I have also tried to extend my channel onto other platforms like Instagram and YouTube. But yeah, that's kind of what I do. It's mostly TikTok up to this point, just for fun.
Oh, that's great. We do have a busy week, as you said, and we're going to leave the Kirtland and Nauvoo purchases for the end. That is our featured news article. We're going to start with some other important articles, including the fact that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is supporting a hockey arena in Salt Lake City in the state of Utah. I saw this first year by Bill Reel, where the church has positioned a statement about supporting a hockey stadium. Bill Reel of the Mormon Discussions podcast said, "Isn't it interesting what the church comments on in order to assert its position and what it steers clear of asserting its position on? Things that are positive for corporate business, well, that equals good, and clarifying church history or doctrine is bad." What's your first take here, Ryan, on what's going on with the church and hockey?
Well, I thought that was an insightful take to point out what they do or do not speak out for or against. So I kind of dug into that a little bit, found that there were a record number of bills passed in the Utah legislative session this year, 591 bills. Like there was an anti-trans bathroom bill. There was one where they ended the department that focuses on making sure we have diversity on our college campuses. They did away with that. There is a bill about gun safety, maybe more than one. Youth mental health related to social media and how it affects our youth. There are bills about reproductive health and kind of debating on whether it's more important to protect the health of the mother or the health of the fetus. You know, there's lots of things going on here. And the one thing that they want to make sure you know about is they want a hockey stadium in Salt Lake City.
And don't forget that the clergy penitent privilege was up this year for being reformed so that Mormon bishops and other Catholic priests could report child sex abuse if it came to their attention without being in trouble with the law. And the church was silent on that as well. So all of these moral, all of these ethical issues, all of these very important social issues of our time, the church is silent on time and time again. But when it comes to the bottom line, because a hockey arena could bring more money to the downtown area, the church is very forceful in issuing a statement about that, aren't they?
In my view, it's twofold with what the church might be thinking about as they do speak out about this, but not other things. It has to be related to the money. An NHL stadium in Salt Lake City will bring in a lot of money. It will bring people to their City Creek shopping center, but it's also about appearances, about not necessarily the appearance of doing good, but the appearance of sticking with their chosen narrative and chosen storyline. And so these other things these other social issues really get in the way of their appearance of, like they're focusing so much on Jesus currently. They're doing away with all things Mormon and trying to focus more and more on Jesus instead. And it's a tricky space to be able to stick to what they want to doctrinally with these social issues, because they know it doesn't make them look like Jesus, so they have to stay away from that. But they want their city to appear prosperous. So that's where it does have to do with appearances as well. They want to appear clean and prosperous. They want their home of Salt Lake City to look good. I think that plays a big part in this.
Yeah, when I read this article, I was not aware of how much real estate that the church really owns in the downtown area and the valuation of that real estate portfolio. We know that the church is probably the #1 holder of real estate in the United States by valuation, and probably #1 or #2 by acres owned. It's just amazing how much that the church owns in the downtown area. And I found this video here which talks about that. I'd like to play that for you, Ryan, get your thoughts on the church endorsing a hockey arena.
Yeah. Why does a church need to be involved with a hockey stadium? It's not a question you hear every day. But in the case of downtown Salt Lake City, it's a pertinent one. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has recently expressed support for Utah's initiative to build a National Hockey League arena, a move that's caught the attention of many. Now you might be wondering, why would a church be interested in a sports arena? Well, it turns out the church holds quite a bit of sway in the downtown area, owning nearly a quarter of the land. That's a significant stake that could tip the scales in favor of the arena project. The church's interest isn't just about hockey, though. They see the potential for revitalization, for creating a family-friendly gathering place that could breathe new life into the city. So, the church's support could be a game changer for the arena project, but what's in it for them? The church isn't just backing this project out of the blue. They have their reasons. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has voiced its support for the new NHL arena in downtown Salt Lake City, stressing the potential for urban revitalization and the creation of a family-friendly gathering spot. This isn't a random act of support. The church holds a significant stake in the downtown area, with ownership of nearly a quarter of the land. But there's more to it. This endeavor aligns with the church's ongoing projects, like the renovation of the iconic Salt Lake Temple, a symbol of their faith and a testament to their deep-rooted commitment to the city. Beyond the temple, they own various properties in the downtown area. With a total landholding around 150 acres, valued at a cool $2.3 billion, their involvement in this project carries significant weight. So why a hockey arena? The church sees this as a chance to breathe new life into the downtown area, fostering a sense of community and providing a wholesome, family-friendly environment for residents and visitors alike. The church sees this as an opportunity to contribute to the community, but it's not just about goodwill. The church's support for the NHL Arena project could have far-reaching consequences. Imagine a revitalized downtown Salt Lake City buzzing with energy and anticipation on game nights. The proposed arena could become a beacon, drawing people together for shared experiences, fostering connections among fans, and further strengthening the community bonds. The project's ripple effects won't stop at the city's boundaries, though. The wider region stands to benefit from the influx of visitors, boosting local businesses and contributing to the economy. But it's not just about hockey. The bill for the NHL Arena project is currently awaiting the governor's signature, and in parallel, there's a separate effort to build a Major League Baseball stadium in the region. This means that the church's involvement could potentially pave the way for a sports and entertainment district, a vibrant hub that caters to diverse interests. In the end, this unique partnership between a church and a hockey stadium could transform Salt Lake City's downtown area and beyond, making it a hub for sports, entertainment, and community gatherings.
Ryan, we've been told that the church is a global faith leader and that it's not just a provincial Utah dogmatic theocracy. But when it comes to the church's home court, that's who they're interested in. They never weigh in on stadiums in other places or sporting events. The church is becoming more and more insular as far as what it's concerned with. You know, the joke is that the church's influence now is confined to North Temple up to 9,000 South in Sandy, Utah.
You read my mind, actually, as that was talking about the community and the appearance of helping the community, but it's also about the money and making everything look good. But where my mind went was exactly that the church is a global faith and claims to be a global faith, and yet what they focus on is Salt Lake City, is Utah, those areas where they are known for and they are seen more in and for. I served my mission in the England-London South mission. Hyde Park, London, was just across the border into the London mission. Hyde Park is somewhat of a central hub of sorts for the church there. And yet you don't see the church, vouching for a stadium in London, in downtown London, in order to help them out and help out their church members there, but you do about in Salt Lake City.
Yeah, you definitely do. And we talked about how in this particular article, how when it comes to social issues, that the church has really been silent on a great deal of social issues recently. The Roe versus Wade, the church did not come out strongly in that. And a number of other social issues, including gun control, including climate change. All of these things the church is really not taking a leading role in the world on. And that takes us to our next article here, which was put out by Jana Reese, which says, Mormonism as shaped by the culture war. And I put out a video on this too, which we're not going to watch, but it basically goes through and says, has the church basically lost the culture war? Have they waved the white flag when it comes to the culture war because they've retreated so far from the public sphere? And it seems like one of the only things that the church weighs in strongly now is things with regards to money. Ryan, has the church lost the culture war?
It's always a battle. I thought this was a really interesting article. It's talking about a book by historian Benjamin E. Park there, where it's the first really somewhat comprehensive book about church history in the last decade or two. And so it utilizes sources that have been uncovered in the past couple of decades. And it also goes over history from the past couple of decades, including things like Mitt Romney running for president. And it brings out how there's always this push and pull within the church and its membership regarding how much do we stick to what we say is unchanging doctrine versus how much do we need to adapt to the ways of the world in order to survive.
Well, if you think about, like we saw in the article here, Benjamin Park is obviously an esteemed historian. He talks about the race and the priesthood ban. The church retreated from its previous stance in the social arena as it was receiving an immense amount of pressure from all over the place. And then we had a revelation that rescinded the race and the priesthood ban. So essentially waved the white flag there. If you think about the church in Proposition 8, it came out strongly in favor of Proposition 8, but the church just last year with the Marriage for All Act said that they were in favor of the Marriage for All Act, which essentially grants a number of rights to LGBTQ persons in the public sphere. So we're seeing time and time again that the church is retreating on the culture wars. It's not that there's Samuel the Lamanite on the wall where we're going to hold firm to our principles. These are divinely inspired principles. No, we're seeing the church time and time again retreat back, including just a couple of months ago, the church approved a transgender baptism, which is one of the only transgender baptisms that I'm aware of that's been approved in 10 years. It's because the church seems to be losing the battle time and time again.
You bring up the Respect for Marriage Act. I think that is a perfect example of this push and pull in this battle they're constantly engaging in. The church was so staunchly against gay marriage, homophobic and harmful to certain communities back with California's Proposition 8 of 2008. But they've learned from that. So there's the Respect for Marriage Act a year or two ago that they came out in support of, which really surprised people because it seems like they flip-flopped from Proposition 8. And then President Oaks came out and clarified what they were doing and why they were doing it. He clarified that they were supporting the Respect for Marriage Act because they had made sure to participate in the legislative process to carve out an exception for them to not be held to the same standards. They want to appear progressive and friendly and not homophobic or transphobic, and yet they still feel like they have to be homophobic and transphobic to stick to their doctrines.
What is one area of culture that the church has stuck to its principles on, that it hasn't lost on? And there literally isn't, in my mind, a single one, unless you want to say the Equal Rights Amendment. The church did fight the Equal Rights Amendment, and it basically won that one, although the Equal Rights Amendment actually isn't dead. It's been passed by a number of states, and it still could be passed as an amendment to the Constitution. But there's really not any areas where the church has held firm in the culture wars and had a decisive victory. And perhaps that is the reason that we see legislation time and time again and important social and political and societal issues where the church continues to remain silent, is because that their voice is not going to be recognized, is not going to be heard. There's no leadership on the world stage that is going to be brought to us by the church office building on North Temple Street.
Yep, and they know that they're being watched with these things, and the people both inside and outside of the church are eagerly awaiting what they have to say regarding these social issues. And so because of that, they have to be very careful with what they say about it. And all too often, unfortunately, they choose to not say anything at all.
That does bring us right into our next article here, which was put out by Gordon Monson. We're seeing in this week a lot of different things from the church about what they will comment on and what they won't. And they won't come in very strongly on the social issues. But then we have a not so veiled message in the LDS Church's recent politics letter to Utah members. And according to Gordon Monson, that controversial columnist over there at the Salt Lake Tribune, he says that church leaders deserve praise for this, and previous council and voters would do well to heed it. So what's Gordon Monson arguing for in this week's editorial here, Ryan? And why is the church sending out letters with regards to politics to its Utah members?
Well, the title Not So Veiled is referring to how basically do not strictly vote Republican or strictly vote Democrat. Make sure to vote on principles and make sure to vote for clean, honest people who uphold your values type of thing. And reading between the lines, it doesn't take much to be able to see what they are really saying is do not vote for Donald Trump because he does not uphold our values. He is not an honest guy. He has proven time and time again that he acts for his own benefit, not to the benefit of the community or the country in general. They are afraid of him, which is interesting because in a lot of ways he does stand up for things that they stand up for as well. So I guess this goes back to the push and pull that we were talking about a few minutes ago.
Yeah, it absolutely does. In fact, the church, that's exactly what the letter says. The timing of this letter is always spot on. As soon as Donald Trump secures through Super Tuesday that he is going to be the candidate, then the church immediately responds to that. The timing here is not coincidental and says, don't vote all Republican along the party line. Make sure you evaluate the morals and the character of the candidate that you're going to be voting for. This is a not so veiled shot at Donald Trump. Everyone who reads these knows exactly what the church is saying on this. You know, it really goes back. Think about this, that on the front page of the Deseret News a couple of years ago, remember after those leaked videotapes where Donald Trump made those horrific comments to women on the Access Hollywood? You remember those?
Yeah.
It was right after that, on the front page of the Deseret News in their editorial page, they said, in our opinion, Donald Trump should resign his candidacy. So yeah, the church continues to take shots at Donald Trump, and he seriously seems to be the only candidate that the church wants to weigh in on either in any way, shape, or form. Donald Trump really has the church leaders' goat.
He has a lot of groups goat at this point. He unfortunately controls a lot of the way we think and talk about things because of the potential for power that he has, and it's no difference with the church. What I think is interesting about this is looking back in church history, go back to Ezra Taft Benson. Ezra Taft Benson was in Dwight D. Eisenhower's cabinet, and so he had some very strong political views. And he spoke out about civil rights, against the civil rights movement, and said that the civil rights movement had been overtaken by communists. And he used these fear tactics regarding communism and saying we're inching ever so closer to socialism and communism. That's exactly what Donald Trump is doing. And yet they're saying, please do not vote for this guy. Like we created a monster here.
Yeah, look at this article here. A couple more spots here from Gordon Monson from 2016 to 2024. What the church is saying in so many words is don't vote for Trump because he's a Republican. Don't vote for any Republican because she or he is a Republican. And the same instruction goes for Democrats, though it doesn't apply as much in Utah because the term supermajority doesn't describe them. You know, Donald Trump has had an extremely rough go of it in Utah. He's been one of the most unpopular candidates in the state of Utah. As far as Utah being a red state, Donald Trump has had an extremely tepid response throughout. So that makes me wonder, why in the world is the church trying to denounce Donald Trump when he probably isn't going to do very well in Utah to begin with because he does not resonate with Latter-day Saints? I mean, Mitt Romney is a prime example as the only Republican who voted to impeach him.
That's a very good point, actually. I do have mixed feelings regarding this because I appreciate the church for issuing this letter. I wish they would have just come out and directly said what they mean with this letter, but at the same time, it's a little hypocritical. But it's, but yeah, it's not too difficult to see exactly what they're talking about here.
It's always amazing to see what the church comes out in favor of and what they remain silent on. Donald Trump, he is to be denounced repeatedly. Hockey stadiums, we're going to give 2 thumbs up. The very important clergy penitent privilege bill that's in the Utah Senate right now, No comment. The anti-abortion stuff that you talked about and women's reproductive rights, no comment. Gun control, no comment. Climate change, no comment. Gaza, no comment. The Gaza and Palestinian outrage, the genocide that's taking place there and the horrific actions, thoughts and prayers. We're 2 years into the Ukraine war. Are we going to denounce Putin? No. But we are going to denounce Donald Trump, but we're going to take a buy on Putin. It's just amazing to see the church's priorities.
Yeah, it's disappointing, really, because I have so many friends and family in the Mormon community still, and I still consider myself in the Mormon community as I'm involved, like being on your podcast. You're talking about it, being knowledgeable of everything that's going on, and I want the best for them. It's disappointing to see potential for good that they can do in the world, and yet, like you say, they speak out for and against things that just makes me shake my head. Like, what are you doing? Are you trying to follow Jesus, or are you trying to build up your political sphere in and around Salt Lake City?
Those are very, very good questions, Ryan. And that's why we bring you on the Mormon News Roundup, is for those insightful insights. We're going to get to the Kirtland purchase of the temple here just in a moment. We've got a couple last things to get through here. And this is another big one here. And this was a very confusing article that went out. And I created a video on this, and there was a lot of confusion on it. So I'm hoping that we can clarify it. But the Ninth Circuit is going to grant the church a new hearing, and it has vacated the ruling that would reinstate James Huntsman's lawsuit. So the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints will argue in June that the lawsuit seeking the return of James Huntsman's $5 million in tithing would endanger religious freedom by giving courts and juries power over religious doctrine. Now, I put together a video that tries to explain this, and I've gotten a lot of comments from people. I don't think they really understand all the ins and outs of that. I'm not a legal expert, but I have been following this very closely. Hopefully, this 3-minute video can help us understand what's going on in this new step, and we'll get your thoughts about it right after we watch it.
Recent developments have seen the LDS Church's tithing fraud case take an unexpected turn. A federal appeals court has granted the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints a rehearing in the case brought forth by former member James Huntsman. This decision by the court brings a new dynamic to the ongoing dispute. The 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals is set to conduct fresh oral arguments in June. This is not a small matter, but one that requires a full set of judges to deliberate on. Huntsman's allegations against the church leaders, claiming they misled members about the use of tithing funds, particularly in relation to the financing of the City Creek Center, will be dissected and examined anew. In response, the church's defense has been stressing on religious liberty and autonomy concerns. This surprising twist has sparked a flurry of legal debates on free speech, religious protections, and the potential implications for other organizations. The crux of this case lies in the allegations made by James Huntsman and the defense put forward by the LDS Church. James Huntsman, a former member of the church, has levied charges that leaders of the LDS Church may have been less than transparent with their members about the usage of tithing funds. The bone of contention? The financing of the City Creek Center, a commercial endeavor which Huntsman alleges was bankrolled using these tithes. On the flip side, the LDS Church has put forth a robust defense. They underline the principles of religious liberty and autonomy, which are the bedrock of their operations. They argue that the management of tithing funds, including their allocation, falls wholly within the purview of the church's leadership. This, they say, is protected by their constitutional rights to freedom of religion. These contrasting views present a complex legal conundrum, the resolution of which is eagerly awaited. The case's reinstatement has far-reaching implications and has even brought to light related lawsuits. One of these involves the church's settlement with the Securities and Exchange Commission over financial practices. This aspect of the case has been referenced in other lawsuits, demonstrating the ripple effect of legal matters, often casting a wider net than initially perceived. Moreover, the potential implications of this case extend beyond the confines of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Other organizations, particularly religious institutions, may find themselves under scrutiny over their financial practices and transparency. This case could potentially set a precedent, prompting a re-evaluation of the boundaries between religious liberty, financial transparency, and accountability. Furthermore, the issues at hand are not just legal but also ethical and moral. provoking a broader conversation about the stewardship of funds within religious communities. The intersection of faith and finance is a complex one, and this case brings that complexity to the fore. As we await the court's decision, this case will undoubtedly continue to stir conversations and debates in legal, religious, and public spheres.
Okay, Ryan, it looks like the church has won a minor victory in this years-long war.
Yeah, I like how your video points out that this is a debate between finances and religious freedom and how the two intersect. It will be interesting to see how that plays out in this court case. So there's this case where he says, I want my $5 million of tithing back. There was a judge who threw it out and said, no reasonable jury would side with you, that you do not have a legitimate case here. So he appealed that, and the 3 judges from the Ninth Circuit Court voted 2-1 that actually he does have a case that does deserve to be heard by a jury. And then the church came and appealed that, said, no, we don't think it should, because the church does not want it to go to court, because then they have to open their finances essentially, and they don't want to do that. So now the circuit court has decided, okay, then let's throw away that decision with the 2-1. And so for now, temporarily, it's technically thrown out again, but only because the whole circuit court, all 11 judges, will now hear the case and decide out of the 11 of them, not just the 3, whether it should be heard by a jury or not.
Right. I believe it is a 9-judge panel that it is going to be going.
Was it 9?
Yes, okay. I believe that is the case. But yes, the full panel of the Ninth Circuit. So it's basically now we're on the 4th phase of this. Huntsman lost the first one. It appealed it. He won the next one. That's the 3rd step. And now he's lost the next one in order to go to the 4th step. So yeah, this is a win for the church. And don't forget that Huntsman, part of his lawsuit has already been tossed out because he wanted the church with a beneficial life, that the fact that it was bailed out, he wanted that involved with it, but there was no church leaders' statements referencing the use of tithing going towards beneficial life. So that portion was tossed out. So we only have about half of his lawsuit left. And that's where I showed in the video that there's all these copycat lawsuits that are popping up in regards to the fact that we had David Nielsen in between the time that James Huntsman filed his lawsuit. We had the SEC fine and the revelations from David Nielsen. And as a result of all of that, that's now been incorporated into James Huntsman's lawsuit, saying, look, we now have more definitive proof of the obfuscation of the shady business dealings and of the fact that the City Creek Mall was indeed paid for with the interest from tithing. And like the 3-judge panel said, a reasonable juror could conclude that those statements, in particular by President Hinckley in General Conference in 2003, could be considered misleading. So, I mean, everybody is watching this. Not only is church members watching this, not only are ex-Mormons watching this, other religions are watching this. Because if the church manages to get sued on this and James Huntsman gets his tithing back, that could potentially open the door towards other faiths and other donations of other religions getting their tithing back. So everyone is watching the Ninth Circuit Court here with bated breath.
Yeah, that's why this is such a big deal, because it's not just this one court case. This could apply to any number of cases with any number of religions. This is one of the more interesting ones that I am following closely, because it's I am especially interested in the money issues with the church, simply because they have so much money. So I'm interested in this because the church is saying that this should not be heard by jury, because this is simply a matter of freedom of religion. We are exercising our freedom of religion with relation to, in this case, it has to do with tithing and the doctrine of tithing and demanding of members that they pay their tithing. And what we do with it as a church has nothing to do with you, because we are a religion and America has huge protections for religions in general. Versus, where do you draw the line with honesty with that money? James Huntsman here is saying this is not an issue of freedom of religion. This is an issue with fraud, plain and simple. You have been proven to have committed fraud in the past. You are fined by the SEC $5 million for committing fraud in the past, and this is yet another example. We want to hold you accountable for committing fraud. This has nothing to do with freedom of religion. So it'll be interesting to see what the Ninth Circuit Court decides.
Yeah, I just had comments on that particular video from my YouTube section that said, "Hey, on your tithing donation slips, it says that the funds can be used basically for whatever the church wants."
True.
And I just want to point out the fact that those disclaimers have not been around for that long. They've been updated in the last few years, but back in the 2000s, my understanding is that there were no disclaimers like that. So when church leaders are telling James Huntsman and others that, as President Hinckley said, not a penny of tithing would be used towards the City Creek Mall, he believed him. And also other statements that says that your tithing is being used to alleviate the human suffering on this planet, to feed the hungry and to clothe the naked, and et cetera, et cetera. He believed them for those statements. Those disclaimers on the bottom of the tithing, that does not also indemnify the church or any other corporation for that matter from committing fraud. Just because you put a disclaimer on the bottom of a donation doesn't mean that you can engage in fraud.
So that's a good point. That I'd never thought of that timing before with that statement on the bottom of the tithing slips. That's interesting. It makes me think that they saw this coming, that the first presidency at least knew what was in these investment accounts. They have an army of lawyers working with and for them as well. It was probably their lawyers whispering into their ears that we should probably have a little disclaimer in the bottom because you have a lot of money here and people are going to be upset when this comes to light. They probably saw this coming.
And just one last note on the James Huntsman. At the original district court level, James Huntsman said that we need to have discovery on the church, meaning that we need to be able to open up the books and figure out what's going on to see how much the church is worth, because if we get a judgment, then there's punitive damages. They refused to do that. And they said that any scrutiny of church finances at all would do undue damage to the church. So the church leaders, they don't want to be held accountable for absolutely anything, and especially not how they are engaging in using tithing. And that does go to our featured news article, which we're going to get to in a moment. Now, our second to last article here is an unfortunate tragedy here, Ryan, and that was a Latter-day Saint missionary from Idaho died in New Jersey. This is unfortunate. This was covered quite a bit here. A 19-year-old man who was serving the mission in New Jersey died Saturday from an unknown medical condition, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints announced. There's not too many details here on Elder Mac Jared Chappell of Idaho. It's very unfortunate and it's very sad. My thoughts go out to the family. This is a real tragedy anytime that you lose a missionary. I believe about 12 missionaries per year die in full-time church service per year, for my humble estimations. And unfortunately, this happens from time to time.
This is a real tragedy. Some members of the church who know of my TikTok channel have an issue with me because I criticize the church, but I like to emphasize that I criticize church leaders and decisions at the top. Members of the church are some of the best people you will ever meet, and this is no exception. He was doing what he felt was right for himself, for the world, for his God, and it is a parent's worst nightmare. I mean, I'm honestly getting a little emotional as I'm a parent myself, just thinking about sending your child out to do something that you think is so important for him and for the world, only to have them not come back. It's just a parent's worst nightmare, and that I feel for them.
You know, that could have been me, and that could have been you just as easily, Ryan. And it's a real tragedy when this happens. I do want to bring up a couple of points on this. First of all, I am a veteran of the armed forces, and I thought about this article this week, and it's very unfortunate how it happened. But I think about the difference between when we lose a soldier or an airman or a sailor in the battlefield and fighting in the nation's wars. What happens to that person when they come back overseas? Well, they're processed through Dover Air Force Base here on the East Coast. And frequently, the president of the United States will go and meet those soldiers' remains, and he will pay them the ultimate respect. In fact, Donald Trump even did that. Barack Obama did it frequently. George Bush did it frequently. Biden did it frequently. Even Donald Trump would go and greet those fallen heroes. And I think about the difference in the way that the church treats the missionaries who pass away in the church's service and the way that we treat our fallen soldiers. And there is a huge difference between the two. There's never been, to my knowledge, a leaked picture of a senior church leader greeting the family at an airport as the remains of their loved one comes home and comforting them and consoling them. But we have leaked pictures from all the presidents of the United States doing it. There's a huge difference in between the way that the church treats its missionaries and its employ and the way that this country treats its soldiers. And I don't understand why there's a difference between the two.
Yeah, there shouldn't be that much of a gap. I mean, one of the nicknames we have for missionaries throughout the world is God's Army. We should be paying them the same respect and reverence. And in their mind, they are doing a very similar act, that they are fighting for the world and for what they believe in.
Yeah, also, when a soldier or an airman or a sailor comes home from being overseas and dies tragically, either in an accident or in combat, the families are taken care of. The government makes sure that those funerals are taken care of, that the family has mental health. They assign counselors to the family. They send a chaplain over there. But what we see time and time again is when these missionaries pass away, the church doesn't pay for their funerals. The church doesn't send any medical care over to them. The church barely even ministers to them. Maybe somebody from a local level, maybe a part-time bishop. They don't send full-time personnel over there to take care of them. There's just a huge difference in between the way that the missionaries should be treated and the way that they're currently treated now. We have seen time and time again that these missionaries, their families, in order to raise funds for these missionaries, that they have to have GoFundMe pages in order to raise the funds that are necessary for the funerals or whatever costs are involved. And the church just leaves these missionaries. Once they're done in the service, well, that's it. Our responsibilities to that missionary have completely ended. And knowing how much the church has in its coffers, in its resources, it'd be one thing if the church was destitute and saying, you know what, we don't have the money to take care of these. We know that is not the case. And just the hypocrisy here, it really boils my blood, because the missionaries are one of the most precious aspects of the church. And the way that this missionary, in my opinion, and others who are similarly treated, it is shameful. In fact, one last thing is that the church sends these missionaries out on bicycles. And we know that riding a bicycle is 100 times more dangerous than riding in a car. It's just like the church leadership treats people like they're disposable, and it shouldn't be that way.
I appreciate having your perspective there, because like you mentioned, GoFundMes and trying to raise funds for the family. I feel like I and others just have learned to expect that. When we see a news article like this, we expect near the end of the article or in a comment somewhere that there's a GoFundMe account set up in the family's name to help them pay for flights and funeral expenses and unexpected expenses as a result of this death in the family. And we've just gotten used to this, versus hearing your perspective, comparing it with the military and what happens when a military service member dies. It's remarkably different, and so much so that it really makes me wonder, like, how much have I gotten used to and just expected the church to not pitch in when they very much could, and in a lot of respects very much should. And I just don't expect it, because it's just normal.
The church won't weigh in on this missionary. The church, in my opinion, to my knowledge, won't take care of his funeral expenses, won't take care of the family, won't go the extra mile on this. But we are going to weigh in on a hockey stadium this week. Now, the church in the legislature, we won't talk about women's reproductive rights or the clergy penitent privilege, but we are going to send out a letter that denounces Donald Trump. What the church chooses to do, in my opinion, is just so puzzling so much of the time. And it really comes from an abdication of leadership at the top. You know, my advanced degree is in leadership administration. If you want to lead an organization, when one of the members of your organization falls or dies, whether in an accident or a suicide, it does not matter. You need to take care of those people. And that's called personal leadership to the family. You want to talk about a ministering program, then show it by example. And the problem with the church leadership is that we are led by a gerontocracy. President Nelson has not been out of the state of Utah except for one time since 2016. And President Oaks and President Eyring are very, very similar. They are not capable of providing the leadership that is necessary for the families and for the missionary program in this church. We don't even have apostles to be able to go and greet these people. This is a very small organization with only a few tens of thousands of missionaries, and only about 12 of them die per year. That means that you have the ability to give personal feedback and personal intervention for those families. Even George Bush, in the height of the Iraq War, still greeted all of those soldiers who came back from Afghanistan and Iraq, virtually all of them, and there were thousands. He had to do it multiple times. Even Donald Trump, who had an extremely troubled relationship with the military and degraded war heroes like John McCain and called for the execution of his Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley, even he had the leadership wherewithal to go and greet fallen soldiers and airmen, but the leadership of the church does not.
Yeah, well, they maybe can't themselves, because they are, like you say, it's a gerontocracy when President Oaks is 99 years old. But at the same time, they have apostles who are younger who could go and greet the families. But not only that, there's also 70s, farther down the ranks of church leadership, people who are stationed everywhere throughout the world. Someone could meet him in New Jersey and then meet them again in Idaho on the other side. They have members of the 70 general authorities all over the place that very much could participate, very much could support the family, at least offer their condolences in person. But yeah, you're right. I don't believe I ever remember seeing that happen. That's kind of strange to think about, to be honest.
Never been a leaked picture with any senior leader of the church taking care of a family in this manner. In fact, the military, when you have a fallen soldier, they assign what is called an escort officer. That escort officer, his assignment is to never leave the side of that soldier or airman until it is brought back to the family. He flies with them on the plane, and he never moves from that. That's the type of respect that military heroes deserve, and that's the type of respect that missionaries deserve, and they're not getting it right now. And
not in God's army. Yeah.
No. In God's army, when you die, that's it. Our responsibility is over. We'll fly your remains home. After that, you're on your own. Our featured news article here, Ryan, is probably the biggest news article. We probably could have spent the entire podcast on this, but it's big news here. What's going on here? Look at this. Responsibility and ownership of sacred sites and historic documents to transfer to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Acquisitions include Kirtland Temple, historic buildings in Nauvoo, and manuscripts of the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible. What's your first thoughts here on the church shelling out $192.5 million for historic sites and documents?
This is big news. I went on multiple church history tours as a youth. I went with my family. I went with a paid youth group where we all loaded on this tour bus and went to the various sites. And, back then I had this mindset of the one and only true church. We have the truth. There's no one, like, these are all apostate groups, anyone who's not the LDS Church. And so we went to the Kirtland Temple and to these other sites, and it's this sacred church history site, and yet it's not owned by the LDS Church. That just that threw me off back then in my youth. And so going back to that mindset, this is really exciting news that the church now, the LDS Church, branch of Mormonism, now owns all these sites that I wondered why they wouldn't have back then. It's something that I would have looked forward to and been excited about. And I honestly am still excited about it in some respects we'll talk about.
We got a lot to talk about on this one. First of all, the church historian has weighed in on especially the historic acquisition of the Kirtland Temple, which is probably the biggest diamond in the crown of this particular real estate purchase and other documents purchased.
It is a big, big day for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Church leaders announcing the purchase of several sacred sites.
The church says it purchased the Kirtland Temple in a deal with the Community of Christ Church. We have team coverage tonight. Garna Mejia is gathering reaction. Carol Makita has a closer look at these two churches and their partnership in preserving these historic sites. But let's start with Shara Park with the significance of today's announcement. Shara?
Yeah, Mike and Deanie, the exchange of historical assets between the Community of Christ and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is very significant. This is something that church leaders and historians have been working on for decades.
This is huge.
Today's acquisition announcement from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is exhilarating for LDS historian Glenn Rawson.
Cowboys aren't supposed to cry. It's that powerful for me. It's just, it's amazing.
Some of the significant properties acquired from the Community of Christ include the Kirtland Temple, the Smith family homestead, the Mansion House, the Nauvoo House, and the Red Brick Store.
That's our oldest temple artifact. And it's priceless to be able to go into that building and say it happened right there. It started right there.
Other artifacts acquired include the Bible used in the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible, letters from Smith to his wife Emma, and the original door of the Liberty Jail.
Just to be able to put your hand on that door and say, Joseph touched that door and was right behind it. I can't wait. I just can't wait.
In a statement from President Russell M. Nelson, it says, "We are deeply honored to assume the stewardship of these sacred places, documents, and artifacts. We thank our friends at Community of Christ for their great care and cooperation in preserving these historical treasures thus far. We are committed to doing the same."
I'm excited of what this is going to do for the faith and testimony of the Latter-day Saints.
I talked to several historians today, and they were all very excited about this acquisition. Now, we just scratched the surface of what was acquired in this $192.5 million deal. We're talking manuscripts. We've got a Book of Mormon character document, private residences, including the Sidney Rigdon home, and then different plots of land.
Yeah, sure. We were reviewing that list and the assets and the history there. It's just amazing.
I do find it very remarkable, Ryan, that they called it an exchange of assets. I guess that's technically true because we have one who's giving properties and documents, and we have another that's just writing a big check.
That's true. It is an exchange of assets, but it's not, I guess they make it sound like they're exchanging for the greater, on both sides, but it's really just handing over from one side to the other side. One side gets the money, the other side gets the history.
They talked about the legend of being able to touch something that Joseph Smith touched. This goes back to Mormon folklore, and there's even Mormon movies. I run another channel, Ryan, that's called the Mormon Movie Reviews. Every Monday night, we review an old LDS classic, and a couple of weeks ago, we reviewed Joseph Smith, The Man, which talked about how important it was to be able to shake someone's hand who had shooken the hand of the prophet Joseph Smith.
Wait, is that the old lady? You have shaken the hand that shook the hand that shook the hand that shook the hand that shook the hand of the prophet Joseph Smith.
Exactly. Lethe Taji. Right.
That is a classic. If you haven't seen that one, go look it up. It is a classic.
Yes, we do a very good review of that. That's on the Mormon News Roundup channel. Joseph Smith and Hiram Smith's artifacts, the clothes that they were allegedly killed in, they all have these significance that goes along with it. Zelph the White Lamanite. There's supposedly a mystical aura that's imbued in these ancient artifacts, and people just can't wait to touch them and be a part of them.
That's been a very core part of Mormon history. There were even canes made from Joseph Smith's original coffin that people thought were magic canes, and they claimed they had healing powers. There's something about touching something that Joseph Smith touched. I still have a lot of that in me. I would be excited to see and touch that Liberty Jail door too, to be totally honest. That's exciting.
Yeah, if you think about the church historian, he said he was excited, obviously, but he said that the most important thing here is faith and testimony. That's what this is all about. This purchase is about making sure that the church can control the narrative, because the community of Christ has had the ability to control the narrative. We haven't had access to the Joseph Smith translation. We haven't had the characters document. We haven't had access to all of these buildings. Now the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints does. And the whole purpose of this paycheck that was written to the community of Christ was to make sure that the faith and testimony of its members will be increased. And also to make sure that if you look at a lot of the old church movies and old church documents, the church never likes to bring up the community of Christ at all. They pretend that the organization never existed. They're trying to, honestly, they're trying to wipe this organization out of existence by purchasing all of these things. And the only thing that was really not purchased was, in my opinion, was the Smith family cemetery with the remains of Joseph Smith, of Hiram Smith, and I believe Emma Smith as well. That cemetery is a special place. I have been there.
The cemetery is one of the only places that they did not purchase. When I looked through the list, I didn't look through it extremely thoroughly, but glancing through the complete list of everything that they did purchase, essentially the rest of the city of Nauvoo that Community of Christ owned, they just bought the rest of Nauvoo now. So now they essentially own all of historic Nauvoo, versus before it was like half and half. You go to the red brick store, it's Community of Christ. You go over to this other building, and it's the LDS Church, and now they just own it all. The LDS Church likes to present an image of being the only Mormon church. Like the FLDS Church, they say they are the apostates, even though they're the ones who continue doing the same things, and the LDS branch is the one that changed. Community of Christ is similar. They don't want to associate with them at all or claim to be the one. Like the LDS Church is the Mormon church. And now they can maintain that appearance even more strongly, that they are the Mormon church, because they own all of the historical Mormon documents and properties and artifacts. They want to maintain this image for their members. And that's what they mean by increasing faith.
Absolutely. And my friend over there at the Cultural Hall at Culch on X, he tweeted this out that, Ryan, you can buy anything in this world with money. I've heard that someplace before.
That sounds vaguely familiar.
Or Jana Reese, which I've had a Culture on the podcast, and I've had Jana Reese on the podcast. I'm tweeting out all of my old colleagues. Jana Reese tweeted this out as well. It says, please, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, please allow these historic sites to continue to be as historic sites, led by trained guides who can answer actual questions about history, not by missionaries, however well-intentioned. What do you think is going to happen here? Is this just going to be turned over to proselytization, or will the history remain intact?
You're talking to a history nerd here, a church history nerd. This is something that I'm passionate about as well, because I visited with my family the Jacob Hamblin home down in southern Utah once. Before going there, I did a little research into his life and learned that he had several wives, and his last wife was a little controversial. It was an adopted Native American daughter of his that he then married as a plural wife later on. And the tour guide who talked about his life didn't bring her up. And so I asked about her at the end, and it was really uncomfortable when I brought this up. And there are actually in Kirtland, at the Kirtland Temple, there's a lot of controversial history there. The reason why the church had to leave Kirtland is not because of outer conflicts and mobs and people fighting them. It was inner conflicts as a result of a monster that Joseph Smith himself created and split the church apart, and some left and some stayed. I wonder if anyone will talk about that, or how scripted the missionaries will be at the Kirtland Temple, because I want to visit now and I want to ask those probing questions to see what will they say about this controversial history that I didn't know about even until I left the Mormon Church.
Yeah, I recently took a history tour to Palmyra. My whole family 2 years ago, about a year and a half ago, took a church history tour to Palmyra. We saw the Grandin print shop. We saw the log cabin that Joseph Smith had, the frame shop, all of the church history sites there. And every time that we went through them, we're literally standing on the spot that Joseph Smith said that the angel Moroni appeared to him in 1823. Instead of receiving the history of these very important sites, for the most part, we mostly just got testimonies. And my wife was like, look, I can hear your testimony when we're in gospel doctrines class back in Virginia. I want to know what happened here. And that's the problem with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They can't help but turn everything into a proselytization in an effort to gain converts, instead of just showing the history that took place. And that's what the community of Christ did as stewards of these sacred sites, is that they mostly just gave us the history, which is the way that it's supposed to be done. And people are rightly concerned that that's going to be a problem when the LDS Church takes over. In fact, Peggy Fletcher Stack released an article on that saying LDS missionaries will staff the newly purchased Kirtland Temple and Nauvoo sites, but will history take a backseat to preaching?
Unfortunately, I think it will, because in my mind, it's not really a question of whether it will or will not, because we have so many examples of so many historical sites. You go visit that site, and you are preached to some degree. Like, even you go to Temple Square, there are missionaries stationed all over Temple Square to be able to catch you, to be able to talk with you, maybe lead you into Family Search Center or the Church History Museum, and to talk to you about the things that they want to talk to you about in order to have a missionary opportunity and maybe have another convert. And that's how they're going to treat this as well. I don't see any reason to believe otherwise. They might treat it historical instead of doctrinally a missionary opportunity. I don't see any reason to believe that anything will be different with this, unfortunately.
Now, supposedly there's an agreement between the church, in particular at the Kirtland Temple, and the Community of Christ that says that it will not be turned into a regular LDS temple and bar people who are not full tithe-paying members of the church from attending or going into the Kirtland Temple. So that's a near-term good thing. But what happens when that 15 years expires? What we really need to do is ask Elder Bednar what his vision is for the Kirtland Temple. Will that be turned into a typical LDS temple, or will the character and history of the Kirtland Temple be preserved after that 15-year expiration?
That's a good question. So there's a 15-year expiration on that deal, is there?
Yes.
Oh, well, that's interesting. That will be up to David Bednar. That will be his time period as president that we are looking forward to in the not too distant future. I posted a video on my TikTok channel about this acquisition of assets, And one comment really struck me, a commenter who, I can't remember if they are in or used to be in Community of Christ, but they said that this is a sad day for the queer community because they lost a safe space, or several safe spaces. Community of Christ is very LGBT friendly. They're allies. They have gone through a lot of transformation within their own ranks, within the ranks of their leadership, where they are very progressive and what I would call Christ-like and loving. And for example, the Kirtland Temple was one of these sacred spaces where they were welcome. And this is a very sad day for them, because now they know that they will not be welcome here.
Yeah, Lindsay Hansen Park, that famous historian who also is the executive of the Sunstone organization, she tweeted this out a couple of years ago where she said, "We took the sacrament in the Kirtland Temple together this morning, and then a bunch of diverse Mormons, including fundamentalists, stood in solidarity with our beloved LGBTQ BYU students. We love you. We claim you. You matter. You are the best parts of the restoration." But, you know, after this has been picked up now by the LDS Church, you know, Jacob Hansen over there at the Thoughtful Faith podcast, he said, "So glad this sort of desecration is over." Because most likely the church is going to put the screws down eventually on these particular sites. That's the difference between the Community of Christ and the LDS Church. The Community of Christ is extremely progressive. You know, they gave Black members the priesthood far before they gave women the priesthood. They haven't run
after the Civil War. Yeah, it's been a long time for them.
Right. They haven't harmed them in the ways that the LDS Church has. Once these things get transitioned over, you're going to lose all of those ability to have those connections. And it's just going to it could become a lot more harmful.
Yeah, it's sad to see in that way for quite a few groups of people. I appreciate comments like that bring things like that, and people like Lindsay Hansen Park speaking out about things like this that I don't tend to think about because I'm of the majority. I'm a straight, white, privileged male. And I enjoy that privilege to the extent that I have to be presented with information that I don't think about. And this is one of those times where Jacob from Thoughtful Saints is taking advantage of a situation in order to harm a certain community, a community that I wouldn't have connected with this news event at this time.
Nemo put out a interesting reel on his YouTube channel that talks about that the Mormon Temple in Kirtland has a serious problem now that it's LDS owned. Let's see what he has to say about the church's acquisition of the Kirtland Temple.
The Mormon Church has just bought the historic Kirtland Temple from Community of Christ, and there might be a problem. It is well known that Russell M. Nelson does not like the nickname Mormon, despite his predecessor spending millions on ad campaigns and feature films promoting that nickname. When decrying the nickname Mormon, Russell M. Nelson said,
"To remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan."
So here's the problem. Take a look at this on the Kirtland Temple, built by the Church of the Latter-day Saints, AD 1834. What has been removed from the name of the church? The name of Jesus Christ. Now, I wouldn't be surprised at all if that signage is restored for historical accuracy.
We know that President Nelson has a penchant for renovating historic sites. He gutted the Washington, D.C. temple and took out the murals. He's gutted the Vatican of Mormonism with the Salt Lake Temple. He's renovated the Provo Temple, which was incredibly iconic. He likes to take these temples, gut them all the way through, build them up from the rafters, and there's nothing remaining that is left. Is that going to happen with the Kirtland Temple? That's the problem, because of the name of the church is quote unquote wrong on the side of the Kirtland Temple. Are we going to see similar things happen when the church takes over all these sites?
You know, that is possible. I can see that precedent, like with the Provo Temple. It's not just being remodeled. They're completely removing it, rebuilding a totally different temple with a totally different name. Even though many, many, many thousands of BYU student alumni and missionaries who went through the MTC, the Provo Temple has a very special place in their hearts. Now it's just being torn down, totally demolished, rebuilt as a totally different temple with hardly any similarities to the original. I could see them maybe considering changing that on the facade of the building, but honestly, I have a hard time believing that they actually would. I am surprised time and time again, but this is so historic that I can't imagine they would do that. I would assume that what will happen here is that they will ignore that. Don't talk about that. talk about the other things that do support their narrative and the story that they want to build up, and let's ignore that and try to make that go away.
Yeah, a couple of other Twitter takes here, Ryan, for you. It's done. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints now owns the Kirtland Temple, $192 million well spent. And I guess the scuttlebutt behind the scenes here from the podcast and others that I've talked to about this is that the Community of Christ, it's well known that they were in financial difficulties for quite some time. Because the Community of Christ is externally audited, we knew that there was a pension shortfall in their pension plans for their full-time employees and prophets and other people. I think it was around, I want to say it was around $35 million. And even though the church back in, I believe it was 2017, purchased the printer's copy of the Book of Mormon for $35 million from the Community of Christ, that wasn't enough to make the shortfall. My understanding is that the Community of Christ only has a few thousand, maybe 7,000 tithe payers in the entire church. And the average tithe payer in the Community of Christ is 69 years old. It's aging. It's unfortunate for them that it's shrinking in the total number of members and total tithe payers. The Graceland University, that is basically the BYU of the Community of Christ, it was also in extreme financial difficulties. They saw the writing on the wall that without Big Brother, which is what the Brighamite branch is, without Ensign Peak and the billions of dollars that the church has, that they were going to be even further along in insolvency. So it was basically a pragmatic business decision on their part that they could not hold out any longer against what I call the great and spacious beehive.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, they have had financial difficulties. I think that's interesting to compare and contrast Community of Christ with the LDS Church, because the LDS Church has been secretive about their finances ever since 1959 was the last time they released a public statement on their finances for the year. And yet Community of Christ has done just the opposite, not just with finances, but with everything in general. 1959 was round about the time that their upper leadership started having collective faith crises of sorts. It's kind of how I view it, where they were presented with these things that are challenging to their narrative of their story regarding the origins of the church and everything that they hold sacred. And instead of trying to make it go away in order to preserve the faith of their members, they said, no, this is important. Let's see what's going on here, and let's present it to the church. Let's make decisions all together and just be open and honest. And, you know, there's more nuance than that, but that's kind of how I see their history, as they have been presented with these things and have made really difficult decisions that were not always beneficial to their bottom line. Not always beneficial to their members, whether they choose to continue to stay and pay tithing and be faithful, active members, versus if they leave. They've had a lot of breakoffs themselves. You know, they're not a huge organization in the first place. Only, what is it, 250,000 total? And yet to have that small of a group have breakoffs, it makes a huge difference to them. But they were willing to take that risk because it was the right thing to do. And now it's the LDS Church who's been secretive, who has been presented with these difficult things, like with B.H. Roberts in 1922, and they stamped it down and they hid it and they tried to make it go away. And now they're the ones who are super successful and have a huge membership and have more money than they will ever be able to spend, helping out the ones who are honest and are struggling now as a result.
Yeah, if you think about the Community of Christ, it's the fact that they give away so much of their wealth in proportion to their total valuation.
True.
They are very, very forward thinking in the amount of money that they give away, especially towards homelessness, especially towards food insecurity, especially towards all of these issues. There's not much money left over at the end of every year because they give it away at a high percentage relative to their bottom line. That is in direct opposition to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I got this tweet here from Kwaku that talks about, why do we dunk on the Community of Christ so much? There are cousins who just mind their own business and preserved half of the Joseph-Smith area of Mormon history for us. We should really be thankful for them. And what I've seen through the Twitter sphere and other places this week is repeatedly Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints members dunking on those Community of Christ members, saying, look what we can do. Look at your church. Your church is in shambles because you can't afford to even maintain these sites and you're about to go bankrupt. But we are a global juggernaut with a valuation of $300 billion, and look what we can do. And that betrays the ignorance of knowing that the Community of Christ has done so much good in this world in proportion to this very small church. It's just an incredibly ignorant take? And why do we see Mormons dunking on the community of Christ this week so hard?
Yeah, if you go to their own website, you can read their mission and their values, and it's eye-opening to me to see contrasted with the LDS Church. That's so much about individual salvation, with everyone who's living and those who are dead, versus community of Christ is focusing so much more on service, on making this world a better place. I really respect them for that. And in their quest to make this world a better place, they have used up a lot of their money. And so they do struggle financially, and that should not be something to look down on them for. That should be something to hold them up as an example of how to make this world a better place.
Absolutely. And you know the difference in between the Kirtland Temple and the Kirtland Temple there, Ryan? You know the difference between the two?
That is the true Salt Lake City Temple there on the right.
It definitely is. Let me just give a couple last takes on this entire situation. First of all, I am hugely in favor of this, as they say, transfer of assets. And one of the reasons for that is because, as you mentioned, Ryan, the Community of Christ mission statement, they are going to use this to further their own, what they call mission goals. And those goals really go towards alleviating the human suffering on this planet. So any transfer of wealth out of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to an organization like that is a good thing, because that meant that all of the tithe payers who helped bring in that $200 million, at least some of that money now will be used for good, instead of in enriching egg-headed stockholders of Apple, Tesla, and Microsoft in Ensign Peak. So I wish that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints could buy even more things from the community of Christ so that that money could be used for good.
It's been big news. It's been, I feel honored to be a part of your news podcast here because it's so big news. I have a lot of mixed feelings about it. I'm glad the LDS Church now owns these historical sites, in the sense that they do take good care, physically good care of their historical sites. They are in good hands as far as preserving history. Historical documents, if there's anything questionable, they have been known to hide things that don't align with their chosen narrative. So I hesitate with being thankful that they bought the historical documents. And the artifacts, are there artifacts that aren't being mentioned? We didn't know about the seer stone for many, many decades that they had in their vaults the whole time. I wonder about these things. But as far as the historical sites, I am glad that they own it, because I'm a history nerd. I want to be able to preserve these historical sites and be able to visit them. And this will make that possible for who knows how many generations from here on out.
Absolutely brilliant take. We got the Come Follow Me every single week. I hope you're following that, Ryan. But this week, we're bogged down in 2nd Nephi, at the end of 2nd Nephi. And what's in the end of 2nd Nephi that can kind of get people bogged down?
The Isaiah chapters of the Book of Mormon.
Yes, that can bog people down. But I found this this week that's going to help everybody get through those. Let me just play this for you and get your reaction. It's a surprising take on Isaiah in the Come Follow Me.
So, folks, I've intently read every word of every chapter over the last couple of weeks. And I got to be honest with you, I have no idea what's going on beyond don't piss off God. Other than that, you're on your own. I'll see all you wonderful people next week.
That's pretty accurate, isn't it?
I can relate to that. I learned to appreciate the war chapters of Alma, but the Isaiah chapters of 2nd Nephi, that pretty much sums up my thoughts and feelings about it too.
And as you mentioned, Ryan, there could be a lot of juicy things that we haven't discussed in the church's historic acquisition of the artifacts and historical sites from the community of Christ. And that got me thinking that there could be some things that they're not telling us about, because we know that the church has a history of not exactly telling the full story. And that got me thinking, this goes along with our poll of the week here. And what is the poll of the week this week, Ryan?
Well, what do you think the Brighamite branch will find among the treasure trove of historical documents and sacred sites it just acquired from Community of Christ?
And this is our Mormon News Roundup poll of the week for March 10th, 2024. We release new episodes of the Mormon News Roundup every Sunday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on YouTube. If you come on over to YouTube at that time, you can interact with your humble hosts. And so we've got 10 choices. There could be some juicy stuff in here that they haven't exactly told us about.
Well,
Ryan.
So let's see what you came up with.
Let's check it out here. Example number 1.
Fanny Alger's long-lost X-rated diary. I would be very interested to see that.
If Mark Hoffman ever produced that, I promise that would command a hefty sum on the marketplace, right?
I'm sure it would, whether it was real or not. I know people who would buy it.
Right. Now, she is in the barn there, but she's dressed like a 1980s girl. So I did get the year wrong on that spot. Hey, it was close enough. Or how about number 2?
The actual salamander letter. Well, that's interesting. That would be fascinating to find something.
Hey,
something
that could
we
be
assumed
good.
was not real, but who knows? Maybe it is.
If they find another one of them, I'm sure that President Oakes will rush out and say that that second one is also authentic. Or how about number 3?
I'm sure. Number 3, the missing book of Abraham scroll. Oh yeah, because we have those pieces of parchment that were discovered in the museum that resulted in the book of Abraham originally, but they don't quite line up with the book of Abraham, do they? So there's always that speculation. Oh, we don't have the right scrolls. Maybe we're gonna find it this time.
Yeah, maybe it'll be in there. You know, the problem is that Robert Rittner is telling us that the section that is missing in the facsimiles is only a few inches wide and not at all big enough to be able to fit the entire text of the Book of Abraham. But that being said, I bet John Gee would just rejoice in finding the missing Book of Abraham scroll, because that was one of his pet peeves for so long. You know, the problem, though, as you know, Ryan, is if we actually did find the missing Book of Abraham scroll, we know that Joseph Smith couldn't have translated it anyway because he doesn't know how to translate Egyptian. So finding a lost scroll would do no good, right?
Irregardless of whether we have or have not the actual characters that were translated, quote unquote, into the Book of Abraham, we do have a lot of the facsimiles in our scriptures. It's not just in historical documents, it is in your scriptures, and you can take your pearl of great price to an Egyptologist and have them tell you about those gods in those images and how they very much do not line up with what Joseph Smith said they mean.
But I'd still like to see it. Or how about number 4?
Number 4, the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon. That would be fascinating to see. But I believe James Strang translated part of that. Wasn't the brass plates or the brass plates part of the sealed portion? Because James Strang already translated that.
James Strang translated the Book of the Law of the Lord, and that didn't have anything to do with the Book of Mormon, unfortunately. Nemelka has produced a actual copy of the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon, and he did so using a sacred seer stone. So there has been a few people that have taken a crack at it, but yes, that would be obviously a big news as well. Or how about number 5?
Number 5, Joseph Smith's personal copy of the Adam Clarke Bible Commentary.
That would be nice, because then we could see all the plagiarism notes in the margin, you know, when he just copied it over into the Joseph Smith translation. Because actually, the Joseph Smith translation was one of the documents that we actually purchased from the Community of Christ now. It'd be nice to see the difference in between those plagiarism of those 2 lines together.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see the original Bible that he was using as well. Yeah, that'll be interesting to see.
Or how about number 6?
Number 6, Oliver Cowdery's Rod of Aaron. Ooh, another magical item. I would love to see another magical item.
Yes, we got Joseph Smith talisman objects. We've got sacred seer stone rocks. We've got all kinds of mystical enchanted objects.
I mentioned the magic staffs from his made from his coffin.
Yes, we could get that Rod of Aaron, and it could be very timely to be able to find water. Apparently, that's one of the only rods in the world that works that way.
Maybe if we take the Rod of Aaron and combine it with Joseph Smith's seer stone, maybe then President Nelson will finally learn how to use the seer stone. We just have to put them together.
Oh, it's very convoluted. How about number 7?
Number 7, Thomas B. Marsh's amazingly preserved milk strippings.
A true miracle, Ryan.
That would be a miracle. Would it be canned and just a can of dried milk powder?
You're taking this too far, my friend. You're taking this too far. I'm not sure about that. Or how about number 8?
Number 8, the whip with which Martin Harris used to beat his wife. What a great man he was, wasn't he?
Yikes! That's the one that's not the one I want to see personally. Yeah. But
you know, I don't know if I'll vote for that one.
Maybe not. Or how about number 9?
Number 9, 180-year-old cinnamon whiskey bottles tucked away in the back of the Kirtland Temple. You know, that is entirely possible. There were bottles of wine stored in the cornerstone of the St. George Temple when it was originally dedicated, and they were there until this remodeling just a couple of years ago. They were removed, although they had broken and leaked. There was just glass left over is all that was there. But that has happened before.
I wasn't aware of that one, but they did use, for the washings and anointings, they used the cinnamon whiskey for the washings and anointings, not just regular water. So that's where that one came from. Or how about number 10?
long-lost white horse prophecy about Ryan Josiah's TikTok followers reaching 100,000 in 2024. Well, that would be a miracle, wouldn't it? We're getting close to 19,000, I believe. 100 would be amazing.
That would be an interesting prophecy to read for sure. And that does take us to our Mormon News Roundup poll of the week. For those of you in the live chat, please go ahead and cast your votes. And Ryan, would you be the first person to take our poll? What do you think the Brighamite branch will find among the treasure trove of historical documents and sacred sites it just acquired from the community of Christ?
You know, I'm a big fan of cinnamon whiskey. I'll have to vote for number 9.
That sounds absolutely tremendous. That does take us to our final segment, Ryan, which is the Mormon News Roundup Joke of the Week. And I believe that you have that for us.
Yes, joke of the week. I thought this one was quite hilarious. You tell me what you think. But a man walked into a bar and ordered 3 beers. The bartender brings him the 3 beers and the man drinks them, then orders 3 more. And the bartender says, well, most people just order 1 beer at a time. Why are you ordering 3 at a time? And he says, well, a long time ago, my 2 brothers and I decided that we would go drinking every Saturday night together. And now we live in totally different states. And so I want to continue the tradition. I am drinking beers for and in behalf of my 2 brothers. And the bartender thought this was a great tradition. And so every Saturday night, he would see the guy walk in and he'd start to prepare the 3 beers for him. Well, one week, he walked in and he started preparing the 3 beers, and the guy stops him and says, oh, no, I only need 2 beers from here on out. And the bartender looks at him and says, knowing your tradition, I am sorry for your loss. And the man looks at him and says, oh, no, my brothers are just fine. I've just become a Mormon.
Very nice, Ryan. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for coming on to the Mormon News Roundup. But before you go, what projects are you working on? What will people be able to see if they come on over to your TikTok channel?
The project that I have been working on recently, as you see, there's a few Carthage conspiracy videos. I was introduced to a video on YouTube about how the deaths of Joseph and Hiram may have been an inside job. And I have just dived headfirst into everything that I can find regarding that, not just that event, but everything surrounding it. And there is actually a lot of evidence to suggest that at the very least, we know that the church's narrative about what happened regarding what we call the martyrdom of Joseph Smith is not true. They are not telling the true story. Even the church itself has essentially admitted that their story is not true when they produced the Joseph Smith film that you can watch on Temple Square. The series of events in Carthage jail, they have presented in that video according to the evidence, which actually goes against the 2 eyewitness accounts of John Taylor and Willard Richards. This is just my hobby to dive into church history. Was Brigham Young involved in this takeover of the church? One person that keeps coming up over and over and over again is Willard Richards. He who was in that room with Joseph and Hiram, I guarantee, had something to do with this plot to take over power, to transfer power from what was the first presidency with Joseph and Hiram to the quorum of the 12 apostles, who were not meant to lead the church.
Well, that sounds incredibly conspiratorial and very interesting. That's one of the reasons that your TikTok channel is so good, is because you provide the best takes on LDS history, ex-Mormon culture, and current events. If you feel like you want to donate to this podcast, we do have a Patreon out there. We'd be very grateful to have a donation. And with regarding to the things that I'm working on, I run the Mormon Movie Reviews channel. Every single Monday night, we review an old LDS classic. And this Monday, which is tomorrow, we're going to be reviewing that old classic, The Phone Call, released in 1977. This is one of the only LDS films that starred an actual star who went on to Hollywood cinematic fame and fortune. You're not going to want to miss it. I want to give a shout out to Weird Alma for this episode's music. Please hit the like and subscribe and hit those notifications. And thanks so much, Ryan, for ruminating with me on the great and spacious beehive. And remember,
no unhallowed hand can stop this podcast from progressing.
When it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, to remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
Satan.